So with all the chatter that we heard recently about we would be the first in New England to actually have a voter go in and check in without a paper trail. No person in New England has gone in to vote that way. And so it's when, as we're looking at this, it would be helpful to have the person who has done an incredible amount of work on that connection of elections and voting and technology. And so I asked Representative Holzel, who chairs the Election Law Committee, if she would let us use the committee room. And as gracious as she always has been, she's extended that courtesy. And so with this, I'd like to turn it over to you, Representative.
Thank you. For everyone's information, this is Secretary of State Bill Gardner, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Dr. Alexander Schwartzman. He's a professor and department head of computer science and engineering, director of the Center for Voting Technology Research at the University of Connecticut. In conjunction with the Connecticut Secretary of State, Dr. Schwartzman authored the Connecticut Electronic Poll Book System Requirements Specifications, and it was approved by the Connecticut Secretary of State on March 6, 2015. Dr. Schwartzman's team at UConn has analyzed the software code and has authored multiple analysis on the performance of the AccuVote optical scan ballot counting device using a version that is similar to the one that we use here in New Hampshire. His UConn team has recently analyzed several vendors' electronic poll book systems, and that is the issue that's up front here today. We deeply appreciate his willingness to appear and share his knowledge with us today. We'll have a short presentation and then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So please invite Dr. Schwartzman. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. You were so kind in your introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I've been a resident of Connecticut for over 10 years now. Prior to that, I lived in Rhode Island for about 20 years, in Massachusetts for about 5 years. I'm not a stranger to New Hampshire. I used to come and snowmobile here as a young man, and I am anxiously awaiting my first grandchild, who will be born in Exeter, New Hampshire, in a couple of months. So you will see much more of me as a result. I will talk about, well, the subject today is electronic poll books, and I wanted to start with a brief presentation. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just to set the landscape, perhaps helpful. So we'll talk about electronic election systems, poll books, the final frontier. I will explain why I call it that. Electronic poll book system is a distributed system, and as such, it is a very non-trivial system that needs to be approached with utmost care. I will talk about some of the challenges: fault tolerance, availability, and consistency. Voting Technology Research Center at UConn was established in 2006 as a partnership with the Connecticut Secretary of the State's office. And for the past 10 years, we've been performing evaluations and analysis of technology used in conjunction with elections, specifically electronic election systems. We have done audits, and we have developed a semi-automated audit station for Connecticut that is being piloted this year and last year as well. So the contemporary electoral infrastructure is a very complicated landscape. Voter registration systems is one dimension. Election management systems is another dimension. Voting terminals themselves, and finally the poll book solutions. All of these systems must work in concert in ensuring that the electoral process is done according to the law, in adherence to the lawful structure that exists for elections. Some of these systems have been around for some time. Registration systems is a well-understood problem, challenge, largely solved these days. Most states have electronic registration systems stored in databases available to municipalities, polling places, counties. In 2002, Help America Vote Act prompted modernization of election management systems and voting systems. To this day, poll books still remains largely a manual process. But it is a process that has both benefits and disadvantages, and we'll talk about that some. So the state of the art in election systems is not entirely satisfactory. In the past 10 years, especially since HAVA, many vendors rushed to market with immature and naively implemented products, and many states prematurely implemented inadequate products, even though on the surface they appear to be modern. One example, I think I'll stand, because when I give lectures I usually stand, and it's hard for me to sit down. The brightest example of improper use of immature technology is touchscreen voting machines. Both Connecticut and New Hampshire avoided the use of such machines, and I note that in the past 10 years, over $1 billion was wasted by numerous states on paperless touchscreen voting machines that are now being scrapped. The most recent example is Maryland, who wasted about $67 million on touchscreen machines, and now they're replacing them wholesale. What is the issue then? Well, the issue is that with paperless systems, there is no way to audit an election, there is no way to conduct a recount, and the only thing one can do is to ask the system, please check yourself and give me the answer. Well, perhaps somebody won by a score of 10-7, and you will ask the system until you're blue in the face, please double check, and the system will tell you it's 10-7, right? So Connecticut and New Hampshire used what on the surface appeared to be a slightly old system, but a system that is software independent, where a paper ballot provides a primary document marked by a human voter. Should there be any concern about the reliability or integrity of hardware, we can always go and hand recount the paper without relying on any technology. This is perhaps not the most attractive technology in existence today. However, this is the safest technology available today. And it is good to see actually all New England states use optical scan systems, which is not true nationwide. So paper is not necessarily bad, and replacing paper with computerized solutions has certain challenges and problems. So what are some of these problems? Well, the problems can be traced to dislocation of theory and practice. My day job is, or was, not in election systems, but in fault-tolerant distributed systems. This is my main research area, and there are many solutions that distributed computing research produced that are specifically addressing the notions of the requirements of fault tolerance of distributed systems, scalability of distributed systems, reliability, and consistency of data. Unfortunately, many vendors and startups are not entirely versed in the existing state of the art in reliable distributed systems. And so they underestimate the difficulty of providing a computerized solution for many systems having to do with elections. In our lab, we have evaluated several voting machines. I'm starting with voting machines, and I'll move to electronic poll books with your permission first. None of these systems were perfect. All of these systems contain severe vulnerabilities that a determined attacker could exploit and essentially undermine an election. So, just because cryptography may be used in some system does not mean that the cryptography is used intelligently. At the same time, perfect solutions don't exist. I wonder what my next slide is. So, perfect solutions don't exist. Why? First of all, it is an unsolvable scientific problem of whether a given software system satisfies a certain requirements. Right? So, for example, is it possible to prove that a given software system in fact guarantees one voter, one vote requirement? Well, the answer is no. It is impossible, not that we do not know how to, it is impossible to have a methodical approach to verifying that a given software system satisfies, in particular, this requirement, one voter, one vote, consistency. So what do we do if we cannot do this? Well, we could test and try to ascertain whether or not the system passed any tests. Everything I'm saying now applies to electronic poll book solutions as well. Unfortunately, modern computerized systems admit vast amount of inputs, and testing for all possible combinations and values of the inputs is not feasible. Why? Because it will take thousands of years using the fastest possible testing methods to verify that you have checked every possible input into the system. So what do we do in practice? In practice, we'll limit the amount of testing that we perform with the systems and say, well, let us test this particular small universe of inputs to the system that we think best reflects the realistic deployment of the system. Okay. And let's say the system passed all these tests. What does it mean? Well, unfortunately, it does not mean much. The system that is used, for example, in Connecticut and New Hampshire, the optical scan system, while wonderful because it uses paper ballot, has certain vulnerabilities. Right? The system was certified in federal testing. However, the system still contains several vulnerabilities. For example, the system has a port on the back of the voting machine, and one can, in about 5 minutes, connect a computer like this to the voting machine and completely reprogram it. Now, does it mean that all is lost? Well, not at all. We developed safe use procedures, and in particular, New Hampshire also, as I understand, physically disabled that external port. So once or sealed with tamper-evident tape, right? So once the port is disabled, yes, there was a problem. Now it is solved, right? Have we solved all problems? Well, it depends, right? So in evaluating electronic poll book systems, we have evaluated several. I need to say that I will not speak about any particular electronic poll book system today because our evaluation was done under explicit or implied non-disclosures. Nevertheless, I can comfortably talk about the landscape of electronic poll book solutions and share with you some of the issues and concerns. So, I do not know how much. What should electronic poll book be? Right. So here's 5 blind people trying to identify what an elephant is. But so the most important thing is one voter, one vote. I mean, we all agree on this. It must initially contain the list of voters. When a voter checks in, they get to vote, for example, they obtain a ballot. We must deal with many voters, therefore we need to have concurrent check-in. So we have multiple devices at the polling place, and immediately comes a problem. Now that you have multiple devices, how do you ensure that the devices are consistent with each other? How do you make sure that a very quick malicious voter wouldn't be able to run from one device to another and check in twice? When you have multiple devices, as reliable as they may be, the devices are going to fail. So what's going to happen when a device fails? Well, suppose device fails in a way that makes it start acting maliciously. Well, you must be able to take it out of the system. You must be able to replace it with a fresh device. So the system is not only inherently distributed, it must be dynamic. So you must be able to swap devices for various reasons without halting the election and going through a complicated reconfiguration process. And of course, the data must be survivable and it must guarantee consistency. If we know that the voter voted, then it must be the case. I want to, well, so it is a distributed system. It cannot have any centralized critical component. So if a system relies on a central server of any kind, we're asking for trouble. Why? It is a single point of failure, right? If that system fails, will the election come to a screeching halt? If, by the way, who would want to interfere with elections, right?
Me.
Not only it is a central point of failure, single point of failure, it is a bottleneck. Will the system scale, right? If an entire state, for example, depends on a single server somewhere that provides wonderful service, actually. It synchronizes everything. It provides consistent view to the rest of the universe, or to the state. But it now becomes a performance bottleneck because everybody is going to hit it at the same time. Is it designed to be able to scale? That's a very good question that is very difficult to answer without actually deploying a massive system like this. And it also becomes a single point where a nefarious entity may be able to concentrate its attempt to interfere with the election. So a centralized server is a wonderful target for a denial of service attack that occur all the time. Every day there is a denial of service attack somewhere in North America in particular. So it cannot have, so in Connecticut, we really do not want any systems that have this central point of failure. And this is our requirement. So it must be a peer-to-peer system. And when you have a peer-to-peer system, preferably it needs to have all-to-all network connectivity so that one cannot snip any particular link, be that virtual or physical link, and disable the system. So the only way to provide fault tolerance when you have a distributed system, peer-to-peer system, is through redundancy. So you must store your data redundantly in the system. Unfortunately, there is a challenge. With redundancy comes the problem of consistency, which is a notoriously difficult problem to solve. There is a very famous theorem, as it is called. It's called the CAP theorem. Consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. So any distributed system that must provide consistent data service must be available for use and must tolerate network partitioning doesn't exist. You can have only two of the three. So you can tolerate network outages. I mean, if you don't have network, if you do not have network outages, then you can have availability and consistency. If you want to tolerate network, if you If you cannot avoid network outages, then you have to sacrifice either availability or consistency, and so on. You can do only 2 out of the 3. So, so what's the downside of not having consistency? Well, you have a person coming and voting twice, for example. There is a window of vulnerability in all electronic poll book systems where the system does not yet realize that somebody voted. There is a window of vulnerability. So if I'm a particularly quick voter and I go from one line to another line, I may be able to vote twice. The window could be small, right? But it exists. I know that in New Hampshire, for example, if a person comes in and doesn't have ID, they have to fill out an affidavit, right? So they will go to a particular line. They will be told, well, you have to do you have to take a picture taken, you have to have an affidavit, right? All right, so this person starts the process, and then that person, being a malicious person, gets his ID that he knew he had, goes to a different line, votes, then comes to the first line, and because the process of checking already began, the system will not check again whether or not that person already voted. And the person will be able to vote second time. The issue of identification. In Connecticut and also in New Hampshire, as I understand, on the back of an ID or a driver's license, there is a barcode. For some systems, it is a problem because they're not able to deal with the barcode. I think I'm done with. I don't know if there are any interesting pictures there. The rest of it is very technical. I'm not going to go there. Right? So let me just discontinue. So, electronic poll book solutions sometimes have problem dealing with the barcode on the back of the IDs. In one unnamed system, it is possible to construct a malicious barcode and glue it on the back of your license. And when you present this fake barcode to the system, it will identify you as an arbitrary voter who hadn't voted yet. And if somebody is not cautious enough to check the name and address, you will be given the ballot. You can use the same, without doing anything else, you can use the same fake barcode, go to the same line, and present the ID again, and you will be identified as another voter who hadn't voted yet. And they can do it all day long. Each time you will be identified as a different voter who hadn't voted yet. Now, I guess I'll say something good about the poll pads, that this particular error does not apply to the poll pad solutions. But how would you know? If you did not subject the system that you're intending to use to a comprehensive suite of tests, how would you know it doesn't contain problems like these? I have, it's just yesterday, my research engineer constructed this another evil barcode, and I actually offered to crash Anthony's cell phone with it, but he refused. He refused to surrender his phone. But there are electronic poll book systems. You can present this barcode, and it will crash. It will crash the system. So a nefarious voter can glue this particular evil barcode on the back of their license and go to each line and crash all electronic poll books one by one. Denial of service, right? And it all is going to be very innocent, right? I just come in, here's my license, please scan it. Oh, you crashed, let me try another line. So issues like these are difficult to identify. Now, again, this just happened this week, right? My engineer just told me a couple of days ago. Well, this is actually dated May 9th. So, just because we have, we're competent, one would hope, right? Just because we had evaluated several systems and we were pretty much done with our initial reports about these systems, is there any guarantee that we have found all problems? Not at all. Here's one example, right? We have finished evaluating this system, but we found something else with it. Right? Unfortunately, as I mentioned already, I think, but I don't mind repeating that, testing cannot guarantee that there are no problems with a software system. Testing can only reveal problems with the system. If you haven't found any problems, it only says that you haven't tested enough. It does not guarantee that there are no problems. So how do we test systems in practice? Well, various techniques. One of them is called failure injection. So there's a testing team that tests a particular software system, and they cannot find any problems. Okay. Somebody else then takes the system and intentionally inserts errors in the software, let's say 100 errors in the software, and then delivers the system again to the testing team and asks them to start from the beginning. And then you count how many of the artificially inserted errors did you find. If the team found 100 of them, well, there is a high certainty that there is nothing else. Practically, it doesn't happen. Practically, we don't find more than 70%. And more typically, we're happy if we find 50% of the intentionally inserted errors. And what does it tell us? Well, if we found 50 of the intentionally inserted errors, 50%, chances are we only found 50% of the errors that are really inside the system. Now, there is I just did, this week, I looked on the internet for some, I think I'll sit down because I'm down there. I looked at some of the reports, right? And with each electronic poll book solution, something has gone wrong somewhere. There is no such thing as a perfect failure-free or error-free software system. We all know this. We all use computers. Computers crash all the time. No, they don't crash every minute. Right? And maybe you will be able to conduct an election without any problems one time. Well, does it mean that everything is fine? Well, will you disband the fire department just because last month there were no fires? Well, not at all, right? You must have it because you know bad things will happen. So I have, perhaps, if you will shut me up, Madam Moderator, maybe again, because I can go on for hours.
Okay, so we'll ask
yes,
questions.
please.
Thank you very much. Would you stand and tell us who you are and where you're from and what your position is, and ask a question, Paul?
Hi, Doctor. Thank you for being here. My name is Paul Toomey. I'm an election law lawyer, and I've been state counsel for, I think, 5 presidential campaigns. And I'm also very interested in this subject. When I heard you were going to come up here, I Googled you, and one of the things I found was that it appeared, and I couldn't really tell for sure, but it appeared that you were in the process of had been asked by the Secretary of State in Connecticut to evaluate specific systems, including the system that we're thinking about having a test of. And I guess my question is, I also called people in Connecticut, and they indicated they thought you were almost done with that process, and we're going to have a report out soon. And just could you, I realize your report isn't out, so you can't give us the results, but can you just tell us where you are in that process and how soon you will be reporting back to the Connecticut Secretary of State about specific systems and whether or not they're safe enough to use in Connecticut?
So everything the gentleman said is true.
Thank you.
So so yes, we have completed functional testing of several systems. As I mentioned already, I am not at liberty to identify the systems. It's, you know, the secretary owns the information. Later this month, we are going to be meeting with the secretary's office and reporting on our findings. Our reports are quite lengthy, and they are not readable by a human being, only by computer guys like us. So we have to sort of explain what is important and what is not. I will say that there are municipalities in Connecticut that are planning or are using some electronic poll book solutions. This is, however, not sanctioned by the Secretary's office, and they're using these systems strictly in parallel with the standard paper system. For various reasons, all of which are good. First of all, the electronic poll book solutions we have evaluated are very unclear about what to do when everything fails. So, how to recover from a massive failure. Now, if somebody grabs a, let's say these two systems are my electronic poll books and runs out of this room, what do we do? Well, okay. Suppose somebody runs out with one of these systems. How do I make sure that they do not start disenfranchising voters by pretending that the voters voted? Right? I should be able to disable that system using my other system, but it is not clear how vendors provide this sort of functionality. So, and even if the system is just broken, it is not exactly clear how to print the voter list that shows the voted, not voted status. Okay. At this point, we are done with functional testing, and we're going to be reporting this to the secretary, hopefully as soon as I get home this month. But what we have not done yet is performance testing of the system. For example, we have tested only up to 3 electronic poll books per configuration. I understand that in Durham, for example, the estimate is that you may need up to 25. I've seen some numbers. I don't know if that's accurate or not. Please correct me if that's up to 25 of these systems. I don't think we have in Connecticut 5?
6.
6 for Durham? Yeah.
4 for check-ins and 2 for registration.
And that's per polling place or per polling place or?
We only have 1 polling place.
Oh, okay. So that's a
I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think that's what they.
right. Well, I don't know. It depends, right?
How about
So-
the voter registration table?
It's 6, including both of them.
A combination of the check-in and the voter registration table. Only 6 in Durham?
I believe that's true.
So
Can I just comment on the point?
You may know more, right?
so we're going to provide you reports to the vendors. We have provided some reports already to some vendors, and the vendors are welcome to revise their system to address some of the issues and to resubmit their systems for evaluation. So this is the status of the process. We have initially I think that early in the process, in 2015, when we published the requirements in March, the plan was to try to use a pilot in November 2016. I do not think that's going to happen this time, because we don't think the systems are ready for prime time.
Yes, the young man.
Thank you. I don't
Your
get called
name,
that very
please?
often. My name is Jeff Silvestro. I'm a resident of Londonderry, New Hampshire, and I'm also the president of LHS Associates. We are the representative for the Full-Pat No Ink Company, which is part of the proposed system. As far as quantities, we won't know exact quantities until if this passes. We sit down with the Secretary of State's office and figure out exactly what all of the process is for same-day registration, pretty much all the aspects of how they want the system to function at the polling place. Once we have that set and we're able to gauge timing of checking people in and registering people on that day, We'll then be able to propose a number of units per location that we feel will best fit each location. We have committed to doing all of this at no cost. So whether it is 6, 16, or 26, it will be whatever it needs to be to get the project done and have it done flawlessly.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Representative Simmons. I'm from West Manchester. I would just like two clarifications. More than once you mentioned that there was no way to have a paper trail or recreate the checklist after the fact if there was a failure. But from what I understand with the poll pad device, we would be able to print a receipt for each and every voter. So in essence, we would have a paper trail. We would have all of these receipts of every voter that checked in, what time they checked in, where they checked in. So I'm just not sure if you were aware of that. And then the part where you're talking about the malicious barcode and somebody putting a barcode on the back of their license and going from line to line, one, I would have to believe that people in a polling location would notice the same person walking up to the voting booth multiple times. And two, even if you put a different barcode on the back of your license so that when they scanned it, they say that I'm, somebody else, the photo on the front of the license still has to match, and the data on the front. So my front of my license would say Tammy Simmons, regardless of whether I put, Kathleen's barcode on the back of my license. It still doesn't, the name doesn't match the photo on the license. That's the whole point of an ID. So I didn't know if there was a specific reason why that I missed on that.
Thank you. So yes, I'm aware that the system is able to print receipts. So if the installation goes down, somebody would have to take all of these receipts and print a separate voter list, and then take these receipts one at a time and mark each voter's name. I do not know how long this process will take, but I would estimate hours. So yes, yes, there is this kind of paper trail. We, however, do require in Connecticut that a system must provide a natural way for printing, for extracting, unless the system is completely destroyed physically, right? For extracting from the system storage the list of voters who have, the complete list, including those who have voted, so that we are able to print it out. We are not content that this feature is adequately provided in any of the systems that we have evaluated. So regarding IDs, yes, of course, I gave you two examples which are perhaps a careful poll worker will be able to defeat this kind of an attack. My point is not that. My point is that systems do contain errors and faults, and just because a vendor believes that the system is fit to use, that is not necessarily so. Even in our relatively modest testing, so we spent maybe 2 to 3 months per system, we would never be able to, let's say we did not find any problems with the system. I would be extremely uncomfortable, therefore, stating that the system is certified by us. In order for us to certify a system, and by the way, in Connecticut, with the agreement of the Secretary, we have never certified any systems at all, because it is a process that provides full sense of security. All certified systems, either federally or by state, when used in the elections, when subjected to independent evaluation, all were shown to have faults and security vulnerabilities, all of them, without exception. So my point was simply to illustrate that severe errors exist in all systems, and given time, I will be able to present quite a few others to you.
Representative Belanger.
I'm Representative Jim Belanger. I represent the town of Hollis, and I am the moderator overseeing elections for way over 20 years. Your scenario about voting twice with or without an ID seemed to indicate that the voter would show up to the ballot clerk and the check-in process would begin before they were asked for an ID. I don't think that's the way our process works. If they don't have an ID, they don't get to the ballot clerk to begin with. I was wondering about the connectivity of the multiple stations. Is it a wired connectivity? Is it Bluetooth? Is it Wi-Fi? How do they talk to each other?
So,
Five years ago, we had a meeting about this, and we envisioned a printer sitting there, and as soon as somebody checked in electronically, it would print a line showing they had been there, so that we'd have a paper backup. It wasn't separate slips at that time. And
so starting with the last one, because I think that this is an excellent starting point. I think that relying on a completely paperless system is problematic. So having some convenient way of recreating the voter list or having a backup list, such as having receipts is one way to start. Having a printout is a different one. The problem is that the lists are not sorted, and that's the issue. So back to your questions, number one and number two. So voting more than once. First of all, I was commenting on the technological aspect. It is a fact that all systems that we have evaluated have this window of vulnerability where a single person voted, checked in. This fact is recorded in a single electronic poll book device, a tablet, right? But this fact is not yet known to other devices. So I cannot tell you how big is a window, but I will tell you that we were able to check in, acting quickly enough, more than once in all systems. Okay, I mean, yes, of course, and that earlier suggested that having a good system is not the enemy of requiring a perfect system, right? You may have a good system, and you may have developed safe use procedures that mitigate the risks with the system, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, in fact, I am saying that we will never have a perfect solution for electronic poll books, never, right? Does it mean there is not an adequately good solution? Perhaps. We haven't seen it yet, right? But perhaps. So, so that was a technological point, Yes, the system has a delay, right? The system synchronizes, but it takes time. When you have many devices in the polling place, this requires scalability testing, which we have not done yet, right? We have done only up to 3 devices per polling place. This is the testing that we have done in my lab. Right? So going to 10, that's a performance test. That's not functional test. We will need to do this, right, before we're comfortable telling our secretary that yes, fine, you use these. Connectivity. So it depends on the vendor, right? Systems that provide centralized server obviously communicate over the internet. For the reasons why this is problematic, I already talked about. Right? It's a single point of failure. It's prone to attacks. It is also a performance bottleneck. Right? Local communication could be done by wireless, could be done by Bluetooth. It depends on the system. Typically, these are not wired solutions. Right? And this is also a problem because you're always open to a denial of service attack. I can come and put a jammer outside of the polling place, and nobody will hear anybody. Right? I mean, wireless communication. So the devices will have to work in isolation. When the devices work in isolation, well, that's a free season on multiple voting, right? Because I know that different lines are not able to synchronize. And actually, well, thank you for asking this question because that also brings the following. One of the safeties built into the paper, what do we call it? Voter list, checklist, thank you, is that the database of voters, the list of voters, is partitioned geographically, perhaps. So in my town, it is by street, right? So depending on which street you live on, you go to a certain line, right? So it is not a possibility for me to go to a different line and vote again because I'm not in that line, right? One of the advantages, and really advantages, of electronic poll books is that you don't need to stand in a line. You can go to a shortest line and be served. But the problem is that now there is no protection built in through geographic partitioning. And so if the system does not synchronize in real time, as many vendors claim that they do, then I can vote more than once. Right? And yeah, so.
Senator Blue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Senator David Boone from Hooksett, New Hampshire. And just for everybody's benefit here, we're not talking about a paperless ballot system. They seem to use the terminology interchangeably. The paper ballot will remain. There will be a paper slip from the when the voter votes. And so I would just say, Mr. Schwartzman, I was pleased to hear your presentation about all of the safeguards, which, by the way, working very carefully with David Scanlon, we wrote into this bill all the safeguards that you talked about, every single one of them. And so I'm just, I'll get to it, Madam Chair. Thank you. And it just all the backup that you talked about. So you tell me if it's wrong. I'm asking you this question. So there are going to be extra e-poll books in the polling area, each one. One poll book goes down, it's replaced. So I'm just going to go through this. I'm going to ask you if you agree with me. There will be checklists in each polling area. I think you would agree with that. That's good backup.
So I have not studied the legislative proposal. So
Well,
I cannot
I can
comment
tell.
on
I
what-
can tell that you haven't because you're not addressing what our legislation does, because it does address. We went back to your chart, but so far I'm on the right track, right? I'm on the right track in terms of backup.
Well, I do not think so, because I do not think that the systems we evaluated provide a very clear way for, first of all, reconfiguring systems should there be a failure. It does require, my understanding, vendor participation, and you may need to stop the election in order for that to happen. Plus, the reliance on the central server is problematic for many of the reasons that cannot be addressed by any safe use procedure.
So why, I would just ask,
Sure.
why would you have to stop the election? So in
Because it
Hooksett,
requires vendor participation to reconfigure your system.
well, if we have a system failure, Mr. Schwartzman, I'd say we got something bigger going on than, something in a polling area. I'd say there's something going, because it's a wireless system. My phone is, we all have wireless cell phones. If our wireless cell phones go down, there's a bigger problem. But I just wanted to, can you tell me, since you've evaluated the system, is the knowing system peer-to-peer?
So unfortunately, due to the non-disclosures we have with the vendors, I cannot say anything specific about any system that we have evaluated.
But you can't say
In
that they don't,
fairness.
you can't say that they don't have peer-to-peer.
I cannot comment on any.
Okay, so you can't really comment on.
I am not able to comment on any
One
specific
last question.
system.
Now, my understanding is the Secretary of State in Connecticut is poised to award contracts. You have provided recommendations, and they're poised to do that very soon, and that it's supposed to be going statewide. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge. We have not yet presented recommendations.
Okay, that's where I had heard, so I just checked. Thank you.
I want to have Dr. Schwartzman address an issue that has come up several times when people have spoken with me, and it's the issue of identification and protecting a person's identity. And if you could address that, how how well are we protected from our information going somewhere else?
So, thank you for the question. So as I understand it, the issue has to do with whether or not personal information of New Hampshire residents is going to be stored at the central server owned and maintained by any vendor. And what are the safeguards in providing that information? I think that that evaluation of any electronic poll book solution must also include the evaluation of the central servers. In all solutions that we have evaluated that involve central servers, there were problems with the central servers. Some of the problems, some of the security issues actually, we have brought to the attention of the vendor, and the vendors were thankful, and they corrected some of the issues, but it doesn't mean that we found them all. Regarding how secure the information is, I think my best answer would be to talk about the recent trial of the internet voting in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. Why? Because the central server is present in that system, as well as it is present in the systems that involve centralized servers. So in 2012, as I recall, Washington, D.C. wanted to roll out internet voting, and in August of that year, they opened the system for pilot use to the population of District of Columbia to make sure that the voters are familiarized with the system, so that voters can cast their ballots and learn about the system. The government of Washington, D.C. felt quite confident that information is cast in a safe and secure fashion. Well, within 36 hours, the central server was completely hacked. All ballots were revealed. The identities of all voters who were real people, this wasn't a real election, but these were real people trying to vote, the identity of all voters, almost all voters, was revealed. The hackers took over the installation of that central server so thoroughly that they also controlled the video cameras in the secret facility that housed the server. And they were remotely watching election officials conducting election with the video cameras. They had infiltrated the system so thoroughly that they were watching from within the system who else was trying to break in and obtain the information. And they have prevented several attacks from countries like Iran and China. Fortunately, the hackers were ethical hackers from the University of Michigan, and ultimately they alerted the authorities. The question is, had they been malicious hackers, would they alert the authorities? Would anybody find out about the fact that the system was sorely hacked and that the identity of every single voter was revealed and decrypted? I would seriously doubt it.
Thank you. Wait, in the back of the room.
Hi, my name is Devin Chafee with ACLU of New Hampshire, and I was just curious, could you tell us how many states currently have municipalities that are using electronic poll books?
I do not know the exact number. I know there are quite a few that are moving in that direction. I know that in several states there are groups that, technological groups like ours that are working with the state, most notably in Indiana. In fact, we used Indiana's early requirements as an input to our requirements, but I do not know the exact number.
Representative Kirk.
Thank you. Neil Kirk, State Representative. Will you be certifying systems, and if so, when? And I ask that because a system that you certify would probably bring with it a greater sense of reliability and the possibility, at least, of avoiding some of the touchscreen system or the Washington, D.C. system problems.
So, by the way, I wanted, I forgot the name of the senator, actually it's relevant. I forgot your name unfortunately, but
David Booth.
I just wanted to confirm, as you have correctly stated, and this is relevant to your question, that, electronic poll books in no way affects the fact that in both Connecticut and New Hampshire, the ballots will be cast on paper as before. So that, I want to acknowledge that.
Just to
Yeah.
answer that one question, there are 39 states right now using e-poll books, and one of the vendors that's participating in this pilot program is doing it in 15 states. So I would assume that you would know that, and it's readily available on the internet.
Thank you. So, to answer your question, so we, first of all, we will not be certifying any systems.
Ever?
Ever. We do not believe that the notion of certification is a meaningful notion. And we only think that it brings with itself a false sense of security. One example I mentioned earlier, the electronic voting machines, optical scan machines, used in New Hampshire were certified in 2005. In 2000, as supposedly wonderful, right? The same year, there were several vulnerabilities that were discovered, including several vulnerabilities that we discovered, in particular showing that leaving machines unattended for even a few minutes with the communications port on the machine exposed has a risk of having machines completely reprogrammed. And this is the reason in New Hampshire, subsequently, action was taken to either cover the port or to physically disable it. Right? So you know, if you relied on the previous notion of certification, it turned out to be completely meaningless. What we're going to be doing is to providing an ongoing evaluation to the systems. The legislative change in the past 12 months, I think it was passed last spring, did not ask for any certification, but asked that the secretary evaluates poll book solutions and that she recommends some of these for use with subsequent possibility of removing the recommendation based on the ongoing analysis of the systems. So we, if a system is chosen in Connecticut, first of all, it will not be any of the systems in their current version that we have evaluated now because of the severe deficiencies. Some solutions are closer to others, closer than others to being acceptable. I think some solutions do have the potential of being good systems. I'm not saying that they're all unsalvageable at all, right? But little more work is required by the vendor to make sure that we can use them with reasonable confidence. They will be used ultimately, if they will be used ultimately, it will be with reasonable technological oversight.
Follow-up, Madam Chairman?
Yes.
So, will you be making public the recommendations that you make to the Secretary of State?
It is up to the Secretary. Again, some of the evaluations were done with explicit non-disclosure with the vendor, so we are legally obligated not to reveal any information. With others, it was implicit or implied non-disclosure. So we're providing all of our information to the Secretary. It is up to her to make the decision whether or not she wants to make it public. We are making our evaluation reports available to the vendors who submitted the systems.
Thank you.
I'll take a couple more questions, and if you haven't already asked a question, I'd like you to raise your hand now, if you'd like to. Representative Burton, I'll take you, and I'll take you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Wayne Burton of Durham. Of course, I'm curious why you mentioned Durham, but you don't have to answer that necessarily.
I heard 25 somewhere.
Where?
Somebody mentioned 25.
Why were they talking about Durham?
That's what yeah.
My question is, I take it you're familiar with AES 256?
I'm not.
That's the encryption system being used by Apple for the database. It's the same one used by the NSA. Why would that system be hackable?
Thank you. So the use of encryption does not guarantee unhackability of the systems. So I'll give you a particular example. Diebold released their touchscreen system in, I believe, TSX. Jeff, do you remember what year?
All I need to know
2006?
if you knew about that system, you don't have to go on about.
No, but I will give you an
I'm familiar with
example.
Diebold and what
I will
they-
explain
I'm
why.
very familiar with that.
You're from, all right, so everything in the system is encrypted and securely so. We were not able to break the encryption on the system. However, we identified flaws in the way that the system was using encrypted information. In particular, we were able to swap candidate counters without ever breaking the encryption. My point is that just because the data is encrypted does not mean that the system is invulnerable.
Thank you.
Tammy's had her hand up. I'll take Tim, and I do have a bit of an answer for you though, Representative Burton. I know that during testimony in the House several times, the League of Women Voters has talked about Durham, and that throughout the day they will use many ballot clerks. So that's where that number probably came from.
I was just curious, thank you, Madam Chair.
Tammy,
Thank you. I don't expect you to necessarily know all of the procedures in New Hampshire, because obviously from Connecticut. And I don't know how similar things are with the way they do it in Connecticut, but a lot of the concern seems to be about sharing of private information and, you know, if the system was hacked and all these scary things. Currently, the voter checklist is a public document. It is available. It's not secret information. It's available to the public now. So there is no secret. I mean, your name and your address and everything's already on the public voter list. But as far as the ability to hack into it, currently, the clerk's offices have to log into a website to access the voter network. So that's not perfectly secure either, but we're perfectly okay with that aspect of the possibility of some malicious intent. That's an okay thing, but this tool that will probably increase voter turnout, make it easier for voters and probably enfranchise voters, we don't want to take a chance on, you know, any possibility of remote insecurity there. It doesn't seem like we're being consistent in what we're allowed, what we're okay with taking risks on and what we're not.
that wasn't a question, it
I'm
was
sorry.
a statement. I'll take Senator Booth and
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam
Tony,
Chair.
those will be the end.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Schwartzman, again, I know this was last time, so thank you for coming today. We appreciate it. Being the scientist that you are, I think you would appreciate that anything that is a new product, new device, has to be, in order to find out actually how it works in real life, it has to be tested outside of the laboratory. I think you would agree with that, correct?
Yes.
So, and maybe you can confirm for me, but as I've done the research everywhere in the country, and as I told you, 39 states, 15 by the vendor that's opposing in New Hampshire, it's all started out with a pilot program. Every one of them, and I have Hennepin County in Minnesota started out, same idea, pilot program, which our legislation proposes, not the whole state of New Hampshire. Wouldn't you agree that that would be the prudent way for any state to test the system like this and then do as they did in Hennepin County where they surveyed the voters, which the voters all said after they were thrilled with the system and how it worked? Would you agree, how would we know any new election technology is going to work if we don't take it out of the lab and put it into real life? Would you answer that?
Thank you. Absolutely. I do not at all say that electronic poll books is bad technology to be used in elections. Not at all.
Thank you.
Well, in Connecticut, there are pilots. They're done in parallel with the established paper vote list, right? So it doesn't replace it. it supplements it. And we learn from the process, we understand perhaps some of the benefits, some of the disadvantages, but I cannot possibly recommend abandoning the existing and reliable, be that not the most attractive or efficient system, in favor of untested technology being deployed prematurely. So also, just because you mentioned something about, well, many states, many municipalities use certain electronic systems in conjunction with elections. I'll give you a better example. All of us use electronic banking, correct? And the banking industry annually loses 2% of electronically derived revenue to fraud. But to them, it is a cost of doing business. So they invested $100, they made 10, they gave $2 to the thieves, they still have $8 in the pocket. Many elections are decided by less than 2%. And I think the risks of tolerating this kind of failure in the business of elections is not at all as acceptable as it is in banking.
Mr. Toomey, Attorney Toomey.
If I could follow up with that. When you're evaluating risks of any system, first of all, I agree with you completely. No system's 100% safe. Somebody could, as you mentioned, somebody could take a pad off the desk and run out with it, but they could also grab the polling book and run out with it, and the same thing could happen.
Of course.
When you talk about risks, one of the risks we have right now, and it's not just a risk, it's a reality, is we have 3-hour waiting lines for people to vote. There's a situation in Merrimack where people, it wasn't a matter of waiting in line to get the vote, it was waiting on a highway for 3 hours, where police went out and told scores of voters they were never going to get in, and they turned around and left. Now that's not a hypothetical risk. That's people directly losing their right to vote right now with the system we have. So when we decide whether or not we're going to try something different, don't you think we ought to take into account the fact that in multiple places across the strait, we have 4 of the top 10 largest polling places in the country in New Hampshire, because we have these huge town polling places with one single place. We have people waiting in line for hours and hours. They have kids they have to go home and take care of, they have jobs they have to get to. They don't get to vote at all now with the system we have now. So don't you think at some point when you're deciding what's an acceptable risk, you would factor in the fact that, you know, hundreds of people are being denied their right to vote right now with this system?
Thank you, and I agree with you. This is not, first of all, this is not a black and white issue. You know, there is not something that's good and something that's evil. But the following, I think, is important to realize, is that the use of electronics, while speeding up many processes, making certain processes much more convenient, reducing wait for people in various domains. Also, the use of electronic introduces substantially greater risks than the paper processes. Now, with paper voter checklists, right, how difficult it is to effect an interference with an election on the scale of a state. It is extremely difficult, because with paper lists, one has to somehow touch every polling place and do something nasty to it. The problem with computer-based systems is that massive fraud and massive interference now becomes possible.
You're talking about with a central database. If you eliminate the central database, you still have to then go to every...
Excellent starting point, precisely. And this is why in Connecticut, our requirements do not allow the use of electronic poll books that require any communication with an external system. I agree with you.
And we can easily do that here. That's not an insurmountable problem.
That's an excellent starting point.
I want to thank all of you for coming. I appreciate that very much. I think it's been a good education for all of us. And I'd like to thank Judge Waterman for coming and answering our questions.
Thank you.